more awesome questions here from the Q&A. People asked, can represent.us or represent.us help with anti-corruption laws? So for those of you who don't know, that's a system where you locally get anti-corruption laws, and then that makes it so that you can address the problem of money in politics at a local level, and then it can spread out through all the different legislatures. You work your way up from local, you do it all over the place in local places, then you could work your way up to state, and then eventually get to the federal. So they're saying, is that a good idea to have anti-corruption laws like that? So my answer is yes and no. Yes, because I'm in favor of any and every way to try to combat the scourge, the cancer of money in politics and corruption. So yes, in that respect. No, because I just don't think it's nearly as effective as Wolfpack. Because here's the problem with it. Legislation can be changed much easier than if you do a constitutional amendment. The problem with legislation is, yeah, you might get the right laws and good laws under a Democratic president or under some sort of Democratic legislature. But what happens when you get, President Mitt Romney or Chris Christie or Marco Rubio, or at the state level with the state legislatures, super far right-wing people who tell you to fuck off? I mean, you could get the reform you want, and then 2 years later it could just be repealed. And also it could be ignored much easier too. I mean, we have anti-monopoly laws on the books. I mean, the Sherman Antitrust Act, it's still on the books. It's just not enforced at all. So legislation, to me, that's not enough, because it could just change. And also there's the problem of, if you get legislation, doesn't matter, because the Supreme Court already ruled that money equals free speech. So it is a right for somebody to spend money on politicians to pay them. So if you pass a law that says, no, it's not, well, the Constitution has supremacy over any laws you pass at a state level or a local level, so it's almost like it's irrelevant from the beginning. So, look, I'm for people fighting corruption by any means necessary. So, if they do this in some small towns and it works, by all means, have at it. But what you really need to do is the Wolfpack Amendment, and you have to not compromise at all on the Wolfpack Amendment. What's going to happen is, when we get close enough, you're going to have Congress say, oh, no, we were on this page all along. We're going to pass the amendment ourselves. And then what'll they do? They'll try to pass the watered-down version. They already tried to do this. The Democrats already brought it up. It was slapped down by the Republicans, but the amendment said, we are repealing Citizens United and now allowing Congress to regulate money in politics if we so choose. The problem is, if you so choose, you're just giving yourself the ability to regulate money in politics. They didn't say they were going to do it. Notice. Because Citizens United isn't the only problem, nor is McCutcheon. But cases going back to the 1970s in the U.S., are the problem. Buckley versus Vallejo is probably where it all started in the 1970s, and there was one other case too. I'm forgetting the name right now. But so that's the real issue. The real issue is, get the amendment that says it is illegal, it is unconstitutional to spend any money in politics. We're mandating by law public financing of elections, or what's called clean elections. I wrote my thesis on this in college when I got my poli-sci degree. So mandate that you get clean elections, and mandate that corporate personhood is not a thing. They don't have the rights of people. And then almost overnight, you make it so that the politicians are going to listen more to the people, because they can no longer take money from these big money private donors. So that's the solution. The solution is the Wolfpack Amendment. Everything else, I'm happy that they're doing it, but it's not going to be nearly as effective. All right, the next one is, what's your fetish? Awesome. By the way, I think all the questions that were somewhat sexual in nature, I think it was guys who asked them. That's sad to me. Women, I'm into you. Please. I want you to ask those questions. Answer. I'm a sucker for a woman with a big ass. Like, there are times I've heard people say, Kim Kardashian's ass is too big. Step aside, son. More for me. No, that, to me, that's like ideal. And then, of course, I've mentioned on air 1,000 times, which I still don't know why I'm doing this. I probably should stop. Every once in a while, I'm into face sitting. But look, I want to be clear about that. I've said it so much now that people think like it's like a daily thing for me, that it's like the one thing I'm into. No, not at all. Like, every once in a while. My tastes are kind of vanilla and like not, weird or not interesting. I'm very vanilla on, what kind of porn I watch and what kind of stuff I'm into sexually. But I guess the one thing where you could say it's slightly out of the mainstream, even though I'm convinced it's not really, is something like face-sitting. Next, I was watching a documentary about Bugsy Siegel the other day, and it occurred to me how that gangster lifestyle has been so romanticized, while gangster rap has been deemed the scourge of the country. What's your opinion on this? Most people can enjoy gangster rap and can enjoy mafia movies and stuff as the pure entertainment that they are. And it's a sign that the country is free, right? Like, you're not going to get awesome movies like that in North Korea where there's a police state and they take away all your freedom. So in that sense, it's actually a good thing because it represents how when we have freedom, sometimes we, cheerlead things that might not be the best things to cheerlead, but it represents the ability of us to do that, and it's free speech and it's free expression. So I look at it like drugs. That's the best way I could contextualize it, is that just like my take on drugs, I'm for them being legal because, as Dr. Carl Hart says, 80 to 90% of drug users are moderate, and they can handle it, and they can pay their bills and take care of their family and do whatever they want in their life. The 10 to 20% that can't handle it, they shouldn't take away the right from everybody else to enjoy it. So I guess with gangster movies and that gangster culture, it's the same, right? Where most people, that's not going to affect their lives. They just like listening to gangster rap, or they like watching, gangster movies. So that's how I would break that down. Here's another good question. How do you feel about publicly owned airwaves? Should all media be protected under freedom of the press? I support both. And actually, I'll go a step further and say I would actively like both to exist. So I love the way that, what is it? The Guardian, I think? It might not be The Guardian. I know BBC is set up. It kind of has like its own trust fund, right? And it's funded by the government, but it's like a couple layers removed. So they're very unbiased because of that. Like, they do a pretty good job because of that. Whereas in the U.S., they're so obsessed with profit and getting eyeballs on the screen or to the website that they have to sensationalize and they have to abuse the breaking news banner and they have to, try to make a profit, right? So, but I like both because I'm biased. I do something that's essentially private media, right? And I like having total control of what I do here. So, at the end of the day, I have to support both. Public media because, honestly, overall, they do a much better job, right? But also private media because I do think that falls under freedom of the press. So you could set up, a conservative talk station, fine, I don't want to censor you. Liberal talk station, great, that's what I do. Something that says they're straight news and is for profit, you got to allow them to go right ahead with that. So I would actively support both and say that both should exist and should be funded and should be viewed. And then finally, maybe one of the best questions here for last for this segment. If America is progressive, why do we vote for congressmen and women who will legislate against our interests? Now, there are so many different answers to that question. Let me see if I could cover all the bases. First of all, ignorance. The American people are smart in the sense that they're not masochists. Like, they understand that, they want healthcare and they want education and they want the government to do the right things and not to start all these wars. So they're smart in that way, that they're not masochists. Their gut reaction politically, I think, usually makes sense. But they are ignorant to the issues. They are ignorant as to what the Democrats really stand for, what the Republicans really stand for. They're not good at, historical facts. So it's ignorance that's a huge problem here. Then there's the fact that people are just distracted. They care more about, fucking X Factor or some shit or some shitty show than they care about politics, and it's overwhelming how much more popular that stuff is compared to politics. So there's the fact that they're distracted. Then there's also the problem of, just like the great book, What's the Matter with Kansas, one of my favorite books ever, it's the problem of they're being misled by appeals to religion and appeals to tribalism. Right? So you have the Republicans who are masterful at their framing of issues, and they scream about how the Democrats are anti-religion and they hate your values and they're against your culture and, they're not for the average working American. The real Americans are in the heartland. We hear shit like that all the time. So Republicans have appealed to religion and tribalism to get votes where those people on the issues themselves, the policies themselves, they certainly agree more with the Democrats because they like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. They like essentially social democracy. Then there's the problem of the media. The media doesn't explain the facts, doesn't explain the reality of our political system and the news, so people can get misled into thinking that, the Democrats aren't better on these issues, when by far they are. And then there's, of course, the problem of the Democrats' shitty messaging. That's something we talk about all the time on the air here. One of the problems why, progressives aren't winning elections overwhelmingly is because the Democrats never say, hey, I'm the progressive guy. Hey, here's what we stand for. Let me be very clear. Here's what the polls are. Here's how we're with the polls. They never do that, so people don't end up voting for them. And then finally, there are the systemic issues of money in politics, because, of course, that leads to corrupt candidates on both sides, so they never push for progressive policies. So essentially, the American people are getting duped in that respect. And then there's the issue of gerrymandering, where the Republicans rig the system so they win even when they don't get as many votes, and the problem of the Senate and how that works. How because you have 2 senators in every state, that means that Wyoming, which has a population of 4, they get 2 senators, and California gets 2 senators, so way more people end up voting for Democrats in that respect, right? But the Republicans end up winning in terms of they hold more seats in the Senate. We saw this in the last election. The Democrats won by millions of votes for the Senate, but they lost a tremendous number of seats because of how it works. It doesn't just go by the raw numbers. It goes by 2 senators per state, and it goes by this backwards old school system that's primitive.